Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Fang Jiaxing. Our group topic is second language acquisition and learning. Currently, with the development and the progress of the society, it is not a new thing that more and more students or children to learn the second language. Besides, the language acquisition is similar to the process children use in acquiring first and second language. Next part is the second language learning. Second language learning is a conscious process, a language that people learn and use after they have acquired their first language, often used as an auxiliary language. Next part is about language acquisition and language learning. For the acquisition, it is described the gradual development over time of ability in a language by using it naturally in communicative situation with the people who knows this language. For the character of acquisition, it is without a teacher, and the learner not much to details of what is being acquired. For the language learning, it is a semiotical process, a process learning and accumulated knowledge of a language with a teacher. With the teacher also analyzes the feature of the language, such as pronunciation, grammar, and the vocabulary. The last present part from me is acquisition barriers. In general, the process of language acquisition is complex in addition to the native language, especially the second language. The most of people are exposed to the second language in their teenage or adults, so they don't have much time study continuously compared with when they were young. And also, the second language is seldom used in the daily communicative requirements. So thus they have some problem like the pronunciation, grammar, even the accent problem.
Thank you for the first speaker for the explanation. Moving on to the next part, Miss Sarah Rehana will be explaining on the two factors of the acquisition barrier, which are the age factor and also affective factors. And I also will be explaining on the first point of focus on the teaching method. So we are going to move to the first factor of acquisition barrier, which is the age factor. So as we all know, in chapter 12, language and the brain topic, after the critical period of language acquisition has passed, which is around the time of puberty, it's become very difficult to acquire another language fully. However, to against this view, it has been demonstrated that students in their early teens are more quicker and more effective in learning the second language in the classroom rather than, for example, 7-year-old kid. So from here, we can actually see that the optimum age for learning may be during the years for about 10 to 16. Why? This is because the flexibility of our inherent capacity for language has not been completely lost, and also the maturation of cognitive skill allows a more effective analysis of the regular features of the second language being learned. So moving on to the second factor, which is the affective factor. So what is affective factor? Affective factor, or we call it as the emotional reactions, are all the negative feelings or experiences that learners need to face during the learning process. For example, dull textbook, unpleasant classroom surroundings, or even exhausting schedules of study. We can also relate it to our own life. When we are stressed, uncomfortable, self-conscious, we are more unlikely to learn very much, right? So in contrast, learners who have other personality traits such as low anxiety, self-confidence, and other positive feelings and experiences have a better able to overcome difficulties in learning space. So now we all already learned all the two factors of the acquisition barrier. Moving on to the next section, where I will be explaining on focus on the teaching method. So despite of all those barriers, there are a variety of educational approaches and methods that aiming at fostering second language learning. The first one is the grammar translation method. Secondly, the audiolingual method, and lastly, the communicate approaches. Okay, the first teaching method is the grammar translation method. This method is the most traditional approach. Why? Because this method treats second language learning as the same way as any other academic subject. In this method, the learners learn the language by memorizing the vocabulary list and also sets of grammar. So the aim of this method is to define the target of learning, to memorize the words, and also to strengthen the written language. However, this method often leaves students quite ignorant of how the language might be used in everyday conversation, as the spoken language is the least emphasized.
Another method is audiolingual method. It has been used for a long time. This method is used to create habits from a lot of practices and listenings. This is the method where students will listen to the language many times until they get used to it and turn it into a habit. However, it requires hours of listening in the language lab for oral practice and does not involve actual speaking, which is why this method is quite boring and time consuming for the students. There is a method where it can be interesting for the students to learn, which is called communicative approach. In this method, students will learn through using the language instead of learning about the language. The student will apply the concept depending on the social settings and situation. For example, in the setting of a classroom, it's more to asking for something like, "Can I borrow your pen? Do you have an extra paper?" and so on. The concept will be different if they are in hospital, where people usually use the language related to hospital, like, "When will I be discharged? When is my next surgery? When is my appointment?" and so on. Next, we will go on with focus on learners. The language acquisition process of L2 may cause a lot of errors and mistakes, which will make the teachers concerned about the students. Most communicative approach tolerates with errors, but traditional approach do not. However, errors is a proof showing how the student improve in their L2. This process is similar to children acquiring their L1 and making mistakes at the beginning and throughout the process.
Moving on, I'm going to discuss about the first content in Focus on the Learner, which is transfer. But note that before I continue, the usage of L1 on my slides refer to first language and L2 refer to second language. Okay, so we're going to continue. What is transfer? Transfer, or known as cross-linguistic influence, is a phenomenon that occurs during second language acquisition. Transfer occurs when the speaker uses the influence of sound, expression, and rules from their first language into the second language that they are learning. There are two types of transfer, which is positive transfer and negative transfer. Positive transfer is when the element in first language and second language have similarity, such as the German language and English language. Both of it share the same rules for adjective placement, which is the adjective should be placed before noun. On the other hand, negative transfer is when the first language and second language doesn't share any similarity. There are total differences between it, such as Mandarin and Spanish if compared to English. For Mandarin, we all know that it's very unique and very distinctive if we want to compare to English. But for Spanish, there are certain features that is different, such as the adjective placement. In Spanish, the adjective placement is after the noun, which is totally different than English that's come before the noun. In the book, they give an example, which is a sentence that said, "Take it from the side inferior." In Spanish language, the word inferior that the speaker is using might want to mean the word lower in English. In Spanish, this use of adjective inferior is logically accepted, but in English it might sound incorrect, because in English we supposed to use the word lower. But even if we change it to the word lower, it still sound not correct. Okay, try to listen what I'm going to say. Take it from the side lower. It is not correct because the lower is adjective. It's supposed to come before the noun. Thus, there's a proof that negative transfer occurs there. If the language have positive transfer between the first and second language, it would be much easier for the second language learner to understand the language better. But if negative transfer happen, the language learner will have a quite hard time to understand because they need to understand new rules for grammar and everything else. Next, I'm going to talk about interlanguage. Yes, the name itself refers to something in between two languages. In interlanguage, the second language learner tend to make errors that have no connection with either their first spoken language or the second language that they are learning. For example, in the book, it is given the sentence, "She name is Maria," spoken by a Spanish speaker. For this sentence, it is both incorrect in Spanish nor English. It is because in English it's supposed to sound as "Her name is Maria," which is the use of third person pronoun. Well, in Spanish, they also have third person pronoun and second person pronoun, which is for the word she, it is ella, and for the word her, it is su. And the correct word in Spanish, for the correct sentence in Spanish, it's supposed to be "Su nombre es Maria." But when they use the word she, the sentence would change into "Ella es llama Maria." And in context, this is wrong because nobody used the word "she name is Maria." They will use the correct sentence, "Her name is Maria." Thus, this error proves that interlanguage happened. And in certain progress of interlanguage, there is this one state called as fossilization. Fossilize occur when the speaker doesn't show any progress in their communicating skill. Fossilize is perceived as the foreign accent that second language learners have in their speech. But fossilization is not the final progress in interlanguage. If the learner have their motivation to move forward and to do better, they will achieve a better understanding in the language that they are learning, and then they can have a better communicating skill and help to escape from the fossilized state. Lastly, I'm going to talk about motivation. When we are doing something new, motivation is what's going to push us forward to do better and to achieve our goals. Well, that is the same scenario for second language acquisition, where for the second language learner, they will need motivation for them to achieve their goals. In motivation, there are two types of it, which is instrumental motivation and integrated motivation. Instrumental motivation is when the learner set to achieve their goal only to pass certain requirements to graduate from certain courses. The best example that I could give this is to foundation students during our CFS time. We need to pass certain requirement for Arabic language, so we just do our best to pass the requirement to enter degree life. We doesn't have any skills to communicate with Arabic language. We just have the skills to answer the paper and pass it. And second motivation is integrated motivation. It is really different than instrumental motivation because integrated motivation motivate the speaker to learn the language until they are fluent so that they can communicate and socialize with the native speaker. The example is like the people that went abroad to live to another country, either to study or to work there. They need to learn a new language because they need to be accepted by the society and they want to mingle around with the native. Okay, I guess that's all from me. So the next point will be presented by the next presenter. Thank you.
Input and output. Input refers to the processable language the learners are exposed to while listening or reading. That is the receptive skills. Meanwhile, output is the language they produce either in speaking or writing. That is the productive skills. Task-based learning (TBL) refers to a model structure or a method of sequencing activities in teachings, especially in learning a second language. This technique has three stages, which are the pre-task, the task, and a review. We'll begin with the pre-task, as it is a beginning stage, whereas teachers will describe the task to students creatively to gain their attention. Secondly, the task. In this stage, students will work in a pair of two or in a small group to perform the task. While doing it, they are required to only use the second language that they are learning. Lastly, a review. The main objective of this stage is to see how the learners or students succeed in completing all the tasks given while learning and discovering the second language. After the task is done, all students will be asked to do some review regarding the activity. Communicative competence refers to the learner's capability to use language to interact with other people successfully, flexibly, and accurately. In addition, it is also the idea of using language clearly to achieve communication objectives. Meanwhile, Cannell and Swan in 1980 described it as forming competence in 4 divisions, which are words and rules, appropriacy, cohesion and coherence, and the use of communication strategies. Communicative competence involve 4 competence areas, such as linguistic competence, sociolinguistics competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. Linguistic competence is the act of knowing how to use the grammar, syntax, and vocabulary of the language. Second, sociolinguistics competence refers to acknowledging and using and responding to the language appropriately spoken given the setting and topic, also the relationship between the people interacting. Third, discourse competence identifies how to paraphrase the larger context and construct longer ranges of language that coherently make up a whole. Lastly, strategic competence is described as an act of acknowledging how to identify and fix communication breakdowns. Not just that, this competence strategy also refers to the ability to work around gaps in one's knowledge of the language and how to study more on applying the language in specific circumstances. Conclusion: acquiring and learning a second language is extremely crucial in a bilingual and multilingual community, especially in Malaysia. On the other hand, it is also necessary for today's global environment, where technology is frequently restricted to particular countries speaking a small number of languages, for example, English, Japanese, and Mandarin. In fact, various students, teachers, politicians, and others find themselves in dire need of learning these languages, including me. To be frank, learning a different language is quite challenging and tricky, but to know another language is an excellent bonus for oneself, especially in the working atmosphere. In a nutshell, life is tough, but so are you. So keep moving and go discover a new language. Thank you.